well, let's just recap a little bit. When we very first started out this study, we talked about something that we could understand. Because sometimes when we look at the Bible, we look at all the individual stories, we don't really understand how they work together. And if we think about it like a TV show in seasons, season 1 is where they develop that the plot, the main character. So that's what we've done for the first 2 weeks. And here's our season 1 lineup. And last week we didn't get to our season finale, so that's where we're going to pick up at tonight. But we looked at the creation, the fall of man, the flood, starting over. We've looked at the patriarchs, and so here is our tree, the family tree of the patriarchs. And I kind of wiped out everything that the people that we weren't talking about, just so that it'd make it easier for you to see. But we know that it all started with Adam, and then the next person that the lineage goes through is Adam's son Seth, and then after Seth has Noah is in Seth's line, and then Terah is in Noah's line. So here's where we pick up on our chart. So Noah has 3 sons. Abraham is the one that we want to look at. Abraham and Sarah, they have Isaac, and Isaac has Jacob. And remember, Jacob's name got changed. What did his name get changed to? Israel, right? And so his name gets changed to Israel, and then all these kids are the children of Israel, right? Yeah. So this is all throughout the Bible. When you hear the children of Israel, we hear the Israelites. All of those tribes are from Jacob. It's from that lineage that God has put together. So that's what we're looking at tonight. Okay. All right. So we are going to pick up in Genesis chapter number 37. So Jacob and Rachel and Leah and Bilhah and Zilpah, they kind of get in this baby war. They keep just, one says, here, take my handmaid. No, take mine. And then Leah has some babies. Finally, Rachel, Jacob's true love, she gets pregnant. Finally, and she has Joseph, and Jacob loves him. I mean, he's his favorite. He makes no secrets about him being his favorite. He loves Jacob, and so loves Joseph. Makes him a coat of many colors, and Joseph's not sure about wearing that coat around and showing it to his brothers, and just excited about this coat because it was a rare gift then, right? And so God begins to give Joseph some dreams, and so it's about things that are going to happen later on. And the first dream was that all of his brothers' bundles of grain are going to bow down to his. And then the next dream that he has is that the sun, moon, and stars are going to bow down to him. And he thinks it would be a great idea to tell his family about this, right? Like, hey guys, guess what? You're going to bow down to me one of these days, as if they didn't already hate him enough, right? And so that is the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Sometimes you can know stuff, and sometimes you need to know when to say it and when to shut up, right? So God gives us knowledge and he gives us wisdom. And so Joseph's brothers, they hate him, and they decide that they're going to just kill him. And so Reuben steps up and is like, no, like, we can't kill him. We're not murderers. Like, let's just throw him in a pit. And we'll just tell Dad that an animal got him, and we'll take that coat and dip it in some blood, and we'll just get rid of him that way. And so then they see these Ishmaelite traders. You may recognize that name, Ishmael. Remember, that was the son that Abraham had with Hagar. So they are the people they're on their way by next to this pit. They're slave traders. The brothers decide, okay, we can make a few bucks off of this. Let's sell him into slavery. We'll get rid of him and we'll make some money. It's a win-win situation for us. So they sell him into slavery, and now Joseph, he's in Egypt. And even though he's in slavery, everything that he touches, God prospers. Like, everything that, just because his heart is for God, like, he is so committed to God and to his faith in God. And so God causes everything that he touched to prosper. And so he begins working for a man named Potiphar, and he finds favor with Potiphar, and Potiphar puts him over his whole house. There's not anybody in his house that is higher than Joseph except for Potiphar, right? And so Potiphar's wife, she sees Joseph, and he is a strapping young lad, and she decides that she wants to sleep with him, and so she coerces him to come in, and she tries to get him to sleep with her, and he says, "No, I'm not going to defile my God like that, and I'm not going to do that to Potiphar. Potiphar's my friend, like he's my master, but he's also a friend. I would never do that to him." And so Potiphar's wife, she decides that she's just going to just lie and say it was all him that made it up, and she demands that Potiphar put him in prison, right? And so now he's in prison. So all of the things that have happened to him so far are through no fault of his own. He's been sold in, he's been tried to be killed, then he was sold into slavery. He's working for Potiphar. Now he's thrown in prison in slavery. But again, even in prison, God gives him favor. The jailer finds favor with Joseph and puts him in charge of the jail. And so he's in prison with two people that work for Pharaoh. And one of them was the cupbearer, the one that would test the wine before the Pharaoh would drink it to make sure nobody had poisoned it. And also with the baker, right? And so God gives Joseph an interpretation of both of their dreams. And so he tells them, when you get out of prison, then don't forget me. Like, I'm here, I'm innocent. Please don't forget me. Like, tell the Pharaoh about me so that maybe I could just get out of this place. And I just wanted to point out just one really significant thing. I've really not studied it out completely, but you can just put this on your notes of things to study. There is such significance in there being a cupbearer and a baker, and there being the wine and the blood. God works all of these things thousands of years before Jesus became our Passover lamb. But God was already working these details into it. And so years later, so he's been in prison for years, Pharaoh has a dream that nobody can interpret. And he was like, I demand somebody has got to interpret this dream for me. And so the cupbearer remembers and tells Pharaoh about Joseph. And so they go get Joseph out of the prison. They clean him up. They bring him before the Pharaoh. And so Joseph is real quick to tell him, it's not me that's going to give you interpretation. If you'll let me pray to God, God will be the one that'll give you the interpretation. And so he goes and he prays, and he comes back to Pharaoh, and he tells him there's going to be a time of 7 years when there's going to be an abundance of food in Egypt, right? And there's going to be followed by a time of 7 years where there's going to be a famine that's in the land. And so Joseph is like, here's what you should do. You should build some barns, some storehouses to store up food during the 7 years of plenty, so that whenever the 7 years of famine come, people will still have food. And so this impresses Pharaoh. So Pharaoh's like, okay, you are my second in command now. Nobody else could interpret this dream. Nobody else could think of these things that you've done, and it's because of the favor of God on his life. Yeah. I had the favor of God on my life when I went to work for the company that I work for right now. I went in with no college degree, working for one of the largest movie theater chains in the United States, and became the interior designer with no degree. That does not happen. Okay. Like there's just no way that happens. I did go back through God's grace and was able to get my degree, and God is still he's still been with me through that whole time. But if you'll put God first, if you'll make your heart be toward him, he will work out the details for you. And that's exactly what he's done for Joseph. And so Joseph, he's in command now. So he's storing up the food, and then the 7 years of famine hit. And so people from all over are coming because they're hungry, and they heard that there's some food in Egypt. And so guess who else heard that there was food in Egypt? Joseph's family. They heard that there was food in Egypt. And so the brothers come, and they come to buy food, and they don't recognize Joseph because Joseph has on the Egyptian head stuff and makeup and whatever else they wore back during that time. And so they don't recognize him. But Joseph ends up forgiving his brothers. And through the grace of God, he does it, right? Because they tried to kill him. They sold him into slavery. He's been in prison. But through the grace of God, he forgives them. And in Genesis 50, here's what he tells them. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. God put Joseph in that position. God took care of the details, because if Joseph hadn't have been there, their whole family would have died out. if there would have been nobody in Egypt that could have interpreted that dream and had the forethought to save the food for the years of famine, his whole family would have died out. And so he realizes that it was God that put him in that position, and so he didn't hold any hard feelings against his brothers. And so that picks us up in Exodus chapter number 1, verses number 7 through 12. Let's look at those. And it says, "But the sons of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly and multiplied and became exceedingly mighty, so that the land was filled with them. And now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, 'Behold, the people of the sons of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal wisely with them, or else they'll multiply. And in the event of war, they will also join themselves to those who hate us and fight against us and depart from the land.'" So they were going to lose all their free labor, right? "And so they appointed taskmasters over them to afflict them with hard labor. They built for Pharaoh storage cities, Pithom and Ramesses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread out, so that they were in dread of the sons of Israel." So everything that they tried to do against God's people, remember what the thing that God gave, the covenant that God gave to Abraham: "I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you." And so the more that they afflicted them, the children of Israel just began to multiply. So the Pharaoh who knew who Joseph was, he died, right? He knew Joseph and he liked Joseph. He died, and he's not, I mean, the new Pharaoh's taken over that has no idea who this family is. They are just a bunch of foreigners, slaves is all they were. And so they ended up in slavery for 400 years. And so that was our cliffhanger for season 1, but we're going to binge watch this just like we do Netflix, and we're going to move right on into season 2. And so I wanted to go back and just recap that prophecy. Remember that we looked at from Genesis 15, when God told him this would happen, right? God said to Abraham, "Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they'll be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. But I will also judge the nation whom they serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions." And so God told them that it's going to happen, right? And so there's sometimes, it's not good news, right? It's not always good news. We live in a fallen world. Right. We live in a world where there's things that happen, where everything doesn't go our way. And there's time, I mean, and maybe it's good for us. Maybe it helps increase our faith in God and our dependence on God for everything not to always go our way. I mean, we want it to, right? Nobody wants it to not go your way, but it just causes us to just go deeper into God when we don't get our way. And so in season 2's episode, so we'll see here, this is the episode, the season where Moses is born, and they begin to wander in the wilderness. It's the story, it's beginning the life of God's chosen people now, right? And so the Pharaoh, he commands that all of the Hebrew babies be killed, and he commands the Hebrew wives the midwives to do it, to kill their own babies, right? And so they're like, we're not going to do that. And so they don't. And so the Pharaoh brings them before him, like, "Why aren't you killing all of the male children? I told you to kill all the male children. The females you can leave alive." And they're like, "Well, Pharaoh, these Hebrew women, they're not like the Egyptian women. They'll give birth to their baby in the field and they'll keep on working. Like, we can't get there in time." And so so they don't kill this baby, that a man from the tribe of Levi. Remember, Levi was another one of Joseph's sons. Jacob's sons, and he was the son from that Leah had with Jacob. And so a man from the tribe of Levi and a woman from the same tribe, they end up having a son together. And so that was God's plan for them during that time and during that culture, is that they would not intermarry with people outside of their tribe, because he didn't want them to marry people who are worshiping foreign gods and that were going to turn their heart away from Jehovah God, right? And so this man and woman from the tribe of Levi, they have a son named Moses. Now, Moses' mother, she knows that the Pharaoh is going to try to kill her baby. And so she does the most loving thing and the most courageous thing that a mother could do. She puts him in a basket and puts him in the river. So the sister, she kind of follows that basket. She's staying off at a distance so that, nobody knows that, like, she's the sister of this Hebrew baby, that she kind of follows and watches to see where that basket goes. And turns out it's the Pharaoh's daughter that finds this basket. Well, she sees this baby, and her heart is not like her dad's heart. She wasn't willing to kill this baby, and so she's like, I'm gonna take him and raise him for my own. And so Moses' sister happens by, and she was like, should I go get one of the Hebrew women to nurse him for you? She's like, yeah, do that. Go get one. Well, guess who they went and got? Yeah. They went and got Moses' mother. So she comes and she nurses him and she's taking care of him. And the Pharaoh's daughter looks at her and she's like, continue to take care of him and I'll give you your wages. Now she's getting paid to take care of her own baby. Ain't that God? I mean, that's just something that God would do. That's so awesome. I love that story. All right. So Moses grows up in the Pharaoh's house, right? He grows up in the Pharaoh's house knowing who he is because his mama is the one that's taking care of him and she is telling him who he is, but he's still living as the Pharaoh's daughter. And so there's one day that Moses sees this Egyptian beating one of the Hebrew slaves. And so Moses strikes him and kills him and then buries him in the sand. All right, this is Moses that we're talking about, right? The one that saw God face to face, the one that, was like talked with God, that was so close to God. He's also a murderer. Yeah. Okay? So he's not perfect. Like this, the Bible is not full of stories about perfect people that we'll never measure up against. They had their problems, they had their issues, but it did not stop God from using them. It didn't stop God from using them. And so after this happens, so Moses goes out and he hides in Midian. So Midian is right there in the circle area. I don't know if that thing will work right there. But so he's hiding out over here in Midian, and over here in Midian is his training ground. That's when God begins to start teaching him. That's when God spoke to him through the burning bush and said, put off your shoes, Moses, you're on holy ground. He's like, I got a job for you to do. And so he teaches him to throw down his staff and it would turn into a serpent. He'd pick it back up by the tail and it would be a staff again. He stuck his hand in his vest and pulled it out and it had leprosy and then put it back in and it was gone. God was showing him his power and the things that he was going to be able to do through him. And so he tells Moses, I want you to go and talk to the Pharaoh for me. And Moses is like, I can't. I got a stuttering problem. I can't talk plain. I'm not eloquent of speech. And so God tells him, who made your mouth? It's not you, Moses. It's me working through you. Who made your mouth? And so he said, but I will allow your brother Aaron to go with you. In his mercy, he allows Aaron to go with him. And so he says, I want you to tell the Pharaoh to let my people go that they may worship me in the wilderness. Okay, that's the reason that he was letting these people go. Not so that they could just be out of slavery and do whatever they wanted to. He was letting them go to worship him, to be his people. And so, but also when he tells him, I want you to tell him that I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart and he's not actually going to do it. Right? So he's sending him on a failed mission, right? Because God is not looking for our success. He is looking for our obedience. He wants us to do what he asks us to do. See, we like things really neat and tidy that we can just wrap up in a bow and that we can figure out. And when it all makes sense, that's how we want life to be, all making sense. But God's not always like that. His ways are higher than our ways and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. And so it's not always going to make sense to us. So, any questions so far? I get rattling and you have to stop me. Questions? So God causes these 10 plagues to come upon Egypt so that Pharaoh will let the people go. He says he'll let them go, and then he doesn't. He goes back on his word. So the people of Egypt, they worship many gods. They worshipped all kinds of weird things that were gods. They worshipped frogs and flies and all that kind of stuff. So each one of these plagues was to show the people in Egypt that their gods were false and that God was the true God. Jehovah God is the one and only God. There was the water to blood, there were frogs, lice, flies, the death of their livestock, boils, hail, locusts, darkness. Can you imagine the smell coming out of Egypt when those frogs died? When the death of the livestock, I mean, can you just imagine how bad it smelled in that place, right? And so the 10th plague, the 10th and final plague, was the death of the firstborn of every man and beast. And this was going to touch everybody, from the palace to the pasture. It was going to touch everybody. And so So Moses, God gives the instructions for each of the Hebrews to go to their neighbors and borrow articles of silver and of gold. So, and he was going to give them favor so that their neighbors would just let them have it. They would go, they would borrow, and they would give it to them. And so what they were supposed to do, the Hebrews were supposed to take a lamb without any blemishes and put it on the doorpost and also on the lintel. And then he also gave them very special instructions how to cook this lamb and how to eat it and not leave any leftovers at all. And so we're going to pick up in Exodus chapter 12, verse number 11. All right. Verse number 11, it says, "Now you shall eat it in this manner with your loins girded and your sandals on your feet and your staff in your hand, and you should eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will go through the land of Egypt on that night, and I will strike down the firstborn of the land of Egypt, both man and beast. Against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you live. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt." And so he's telling them, put the blood. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. And we know that that is a picture of Jesus being the perfect Lamb of God without spot or blemish. Amen. And whoever accepts him will live forever, right? So when we, as Christians, when we lay this earthly body down, we are going from life to eternal life, right? So that's, as a life of a believer, that's the progression that we have, is from life to eternal life. Once we close our eyes here on this earth, we wake up with Jesus. Amen. At midnight, so God sends the death angel, and it hits Pharaoh's house. It hits every house in Egypt. The firstborn, the first of the livestock, all of those, the death angel takes. And so, I mean, there is a great weeping and wailing and mourning in Egypt. Everybody is weeping and wailing that did not have the blood, right? And so Pharaoh tells Moses and Aaron, "I've had enough of you two. Get out now. Take your people and get out." And so they sure do. They leave with all of the wealth of Egypt on their backs, right? So they're headed out of Egypt. And so when God leads them out, he does not take them through the land of the Philistines, because if he knew that they went in and saw the giants that lived in that land, that they would change their mind. And so here on your map, so right here, you can see that right there at the Sea of the Philistines. So that's the way of the Philistines. So they're headed to Canaan. That would be the quick route, right? Like straight in. They could have just went straight in, but God had mercy on them. He knew if they saw the giants that lived in that land, that they would change their mind and they would turn back around. And so instead, he takes them through the wilderness to the Red Sea. And so Pharaoh's men, they come to themselves and realize, what have we just done? We just let over 1 million workers go. Like, who's going to do the labor now? Like, all these people are gone. And so they take off after them. They start pursuing them. But God uses Moses and his staff to part the Red Sea. They cross on dry ground, and then once all they get across and the Egyptians come in, the water comes down and they're drowned in the sea, right? And so God, he's starting to lead the Hebrews in a cloud by day and fire by night. And that is the visible presence of God. How many of you would like to have the visible presence of God with you sometimes? Remember, they had been in Egypt for 400 years. They had not worshiped in 400 years. They didn't know God, right? And so he brings them out, and he's gracious to show them who he is. Does he have to? No, he's God. He doesn't have to, but he loves these people, and he wants to show them that they can trust him, that he's with them, and that he's for them. And so he shows up in a cloud by day and fire by night. And so remember, they hadn't worshiped. They had some things that they needed to learn. They lived in a culture that worshiped many, many gods, and God was not going to be added to a list. Right? There's sometimes, you'll go into a house and, they'll have a crucifix, and then they'll have a lucky horseshoe, and then they'll have, another idol set up. It's like they've got these backup plans. God's not going to be a backup plan. He's not going to be added to the list. He is going to be God or nothing. You shall have no other gods before me. So God is going to be your God or not at all. There's not like God plus, Baal or Muhammad or whoever else that we want to add to the list. And so he brought them out of Egypt, but now he's got to bring Egypt out of them because they've got a lot of mindsets that are not in line with the way he wants things done. And so he's taken them into this land to become his people, and he can't take them in there with that mindset. That's why, they needed to take this journey. So God had a plan, even when they couldn't understand it, even when it felt like they were going the long way. God was doing something. And so sometimes we just got to trust him, even when we don't understand what he's doing. Okay, so they get into the wilderness and they start complaining. Moses, we're tired, we're hungry. We don't have the food we used to have in Egypt. And so God, they say they're thirsty, and God tells Moses, strike that rock and watch water pour out of it. So he gives them water from a rock. When I say they're out in the wilderness, they're not in the Amazon where there's trees and rainforest and all that. The wilderness is desert, right? So they are out in the middle of desert lands, and so God has provided water from a rock. He causes bread to rain down from heaven, this manna, the wafer like thing to rain down from heaven. And so he tells them, just take enough for today, right? Just don't take enough for tomorrow, just take enough for today, because he wants them to learn to trust him day by day for their needs. And that's what we have to do as well, is learn to trust him day by day, not try to figure out how it's going to work out in 10 years from now or whatever. I mean, we may have plans, but the joke is tell God your plans, right? And so he's telling them, just gather enough for today, because he's showing them that he'll be faithful to provide for them every single day. Well, then they get tired of manna. We're tired of manna. And so God, he gives them quail to eat. And while they still have the meat in their teeth, the Bible says they're complaining again. And so they had clothes that didn't wear out. They had shoes that didn't wear out. Their feet didn't even swell. I mean, all of the miles that these people walked in sandals through the desert, their feet didn't even swell, is what the Bible says. And so they're passing through the land, and there's, the land is inhabited with other people. God's people are not the only people living on the earth, right? Like, there are other people that are out there living. And so there is a group called the Amalekites, and they are enemies against the children of Israel. And so God gives them victory over the Amalekites. And then God, in chapter number 19, Exodus 19, he reminds them why he brought them out of Egypt, and he makes a covenant with them to be their God. And it says, Moses went up to God, and the Lord called him from the mountain, saying, thus you shall say to the house of Jacob and to the sons of Israel, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all the peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the sons of Israel. And so he's telling them, he was like, if you'll just obey me, I will be your God. I'll have your back. I will take care of all these people that want to fight against you. I will bless you. I will provide for you. All you got to do is just keep my word. Right? So he's making a promise, a covenant, a contract. That's what our Bible is our contract with God, signed in the blood of Jesus. It's already finished, right? And so he promises them that he's going to drive out the inhabitants of the land for the Israelites. And so in chapter number 19 is where Moses meets God on Mount Sinai. All right. So Mount Sinai is down there at the bottom, kind of like where the Red Sea makes a little V. So right here, you can see my cursor on the screen, is Mount Sinai. So that's where they're at. That's where Moses gets the 10 Commandments. That's where he gets all of the laws and the rules and the things like that they're supposed to follow. And so that's where they're camped out. And so it's taken them about a year to get to this place. And they're camped out there for about a year at Mount Sinai. So they're hanging out there at Mount Sinai. All right. Exodus 23. God's given them the plan for how they're going to take this promised land, like the things that they need to do. And so he says, behold, I'm going to send an angel before you to guard you along the way and to bring you into the place which I have prepared. And so they, again, a visible representation. God's given them something that they can see, something that they can follow. Be on your guard before him and obey his voice. Do not be rebellious toward him, for he will not pardon your transgressions, since my name is in him. But if you truly obey his voice and do all that I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries, right? I'll bless those that bless you and curse those that curse you. My angel will go before you to bring you into the land of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I will completely destroy them. You shall not worship their gods, nor serve them, nor do according to their deeds, but you shall utterly overthrow them and break their sacred pillars into pieces. But you shall serve the Lord your God, and he will bless your bread and your water. I will remove sickness from your midst, and there shall be no one miscarrying or barren in your land. I will fulfill the number of your days, and I will send my terror ahead of you. I will throw into confusion all of the peoples who come among you who come, and I will make your enemies turn their backs to you. Remember that I will send my terror ahead of you, because we're going to talk about that in just a minute. I will send hornets ahead of you so that they will drive out the Hivites, the Canaanites, and Hittites. I will not drive them out before you in a single year, that the land may become desolate and the beasts of the field may become too numerous for you. So God has a plan. He's thought of everything. Like he wasn't going to just get rid of all the inhabitants and then all of the beasts of the field were going to take over, and then that would be their next problem. But no, he's like, I'm not going to do it all at once, but I'm going to do it little by little. So he's telling them this is how it's going to work. Don't be surprised when it works this way, that they all don't just go away at once, right? So he's laid out the map for them, like it's like a recipe. All you got to do is follow the instructions, right? And so chapter number 24, they promise, oh yes, Moses, we promise we'll do all the things that God said to do. And so they don't. They don't. They promise and they don't. They say that so many times, and they continue to fail so many times. So that brings us up to Exodus chapter number 25. Okay, so Exodus 25 through 31, God gives Moses plans for a tabernacle or tent that they're going to build, and that's where God's going to dwell among them, right? Like they didn't have the Holy Spirit living on them, inside of them like we do, right? The Holy Spirit hadn't come yet. He would light upon them on certain people for certain tasks, but he wasn't like dwelling among them. And so this is where God was going to dwell among them, in this tabernacle and tent. Every time they moved, they had to take it down, move it to the next location, and then put it all back up. And it was the Levites that had to do this. And so I read that there was usually around the age of 50 is when these Levites would retire, not for any other reason than just it was a hard task to move this tent all the time, right? And so this was the place that God's presence was going to meet with them. So we know that there was the outer court, and then there was the inner court where there was the Holy of Holies, and then the most holy place. The most holy place was that place where the Ark of the Covenant resided, and that's where God would meet with them, right there on the mercy seat. All right. So they had traveled through the wilderness for about a year, grumbling and whining and angering God the whole way, and angering Moses. They promised over and over that they were going to obey. And so there's one time that in Exodus 32 that Moses has gone up on Mount Sinai again, and he's talking to God, and he's gone so long that the people kind of lose hope that he's even coming back. And so they're like, well, Moses isn't coming back, Aaron. So you need to make us a God to go before us now. And so Aaron's like, okay. And so he falls to the peer pressure, and he's like, give me all your gold. Give me your earrings and stuff. And so he takes their gold, melts it down, and makes a golden calf. Right? He makes this God has, we read it now, and we're not there, and we're not living in the middle of it, but we're like, what? Like, this God who has provided for you, he's brought you out of slavery, he's taking care of you this whole way, and now you want to replace him with a golden calf? And the gold even came from the gold that you brought out of Egypt, that God gave you as you brought it out of Egypt. And so God tells Moses that this is happening while Moses is up on the mountain. God tells him, he was like, these people have done it again, Moses. He's like, I'm just going to let my anger burn against them. I'm going to wipe them out. I'm gonna start over. I'll give you a better nation than this one. And Moses is like, no, 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 please don't do that, God. He's like, do you want the Egyptians to find out that you brought them out here to destroy them? Is that the reputation that you want? And so God's like, okay, that's fine. I won't destroy them. And so he gives Moses the 10 commandments, and Moses comes back down. And when he sees it with his eyes, I mean, there's a difference between hearing about it, but then when you see it, right. When you see something like that, it just gets in you, and you're just, and he couldn't take it. So he smashed, he's like, they're not going to follow these. And he just smashes them. I mean, God does replace them later, but I mean, it was just a righteous indignation. Like, and Aaron, what is your problem, man? Why would you build this? And Aaron was like, well, we just put the gold in the fire and it popped out. No, Aaron, it did not. That's not how it works. And so God does have to punish their sin, right? So the people that participated in this, they did get punished for their sin. But then God tells Moses to continue the journey. Our failures do not faze God, right? Even though they broke their promise to him, he did not break his promise to them. He made a promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that he would bring his people into the land that he had promised them. He didn't start them out on a journey and not planning to get them all the way where that they were going to go. So when God is leading you somewhere, even though you may feel like there's 1,000 sidetracks, God will get you to where he promised you. He will take you where he's promised you that he'll take you. All right. And then he tells them to continue the tabernacle. He's still going to come and meet with them, just like he did with Adam and Eve. Remember when Adam and Eve fell? God still came back down and met with them, didn't he? And he was like, Adam, where are you? And they're like, we're hiding, like they felt like that they needed to hide. These people, I mean, God, they've sinned against God greatly, and God still says, continue to build the tabernacle where I'll meet with you. All right, so that gets us all the way through the book of Exodus. And so Leviticus is our next book. And do not worry, we're not going to go in depth on the book of Leviticus, because that's where a lot of people would take off running right now. There is a lot of rules and laws and things that that God is teaching his people there. They're still camped out there at Mount Sinai, so that's where they're still at. The book of Leviticus, it gives all the rules about burnt offerings, about sacrifices, what to eat, what not to eat, about cleanliness, atonement, relationships, basically how to live as God's people. That's what he's given them. And a lot of them are things that right now science is just now catching up with. I mean, one of the rules is you need to wash your hands before you eat. Or when you make one of the pottery bowls, if something has dyed in it, you throw that one away and don't use it anymore because of the germs that are in it. So I mean, it was just common sense things. But then science later on, decided that they came up with those things. Well, no, God said it a long time ago. So there were 613 laws, and I wanted to share this. I read it. I just thought it was really interesting. So there's 613 laws. There were 248 things to do, right? Things that they should do. And then there were 365 things not to do. Well, the rabbis had this tradition that they said that there were 365 days in a year and 248 bones in the human body, right? So that's what they believed. When I looked at the amount of human bones, we end up with somewhere between 206 to 213. But another thing that I read said that we started out with 300, and then as bones fused together. So the 248 probably was around the age of 17 or so, is basically where they were getting. It's what they believed. So this is the tradition that they passed on. So 365 days in a year, 248 bones in the body. And it said that every day of their life, with every bone in their body, they were to honor and obey God. And that's what they lived by. They woke up every single day under the burden of the law, right? They had rules and they had expectations that they had to follow. I just thought that was interesting. All right, so that brings us to Numbers. So the story of Numbers is the story of the Israelites wandering through the wilderness. It's that time period after they've already left Egypt and before they entered the promised land. So that's their transition period, right? And so as the book of Numbers begins, the Israelites have been kept out there at Mount Sinai for about a year. I mean, that you can find that in Numbers 1:1. But so they also start out by taking a census of all of the people that came out. Did you have something? Okay. So they took a census of all of the people that came out, and what they really were counting were the warriors. So they wanted to know how many men over 20 years old that they had from each tribe, and they grouped them by tribe. And so it came up to 603,550. That's how many men over the age of 20. Now, that didn't include all of the women. That didn't include the people younger than 20. That was just people over the age of 20. So that's where we get there were over 1 million people that came out of Egypt. 603,550. And Numbers 2 is where it breaks it down by tribe. There's like 43,000 of one tribe, 54,000 of another tribe. So in Numbers 3, the tribe of Levi is established as the tribe that would be the priests. So they're not going to be warriors. They're going to be the priests, the ones that are taking care of the moving the tabernacle through the wilderness. Sometimes that they would go before the warriors, sounding trumpets or blowing shofars, things like that, but they weren't counted among the warriors. And then in Numbers 9, God institutes the observance of the Passover. Remember, so God has, he's sent the death angel in Egypt. He passed over them. They ate a meal before they left. So God's saying, I want you to celebrate that every year. I don't want you to forget about this. Don't let your kids forget about this. How I brought you out from this place. Like you need to celebrate this every single year on a specific day of the year, right? And so after traveling about 2 years, the Hebrews, they finally get to a place in Canaan at the south entrance called Kadesh. All right, so down at the bottom is Mount Sinai, where that they were at. And then Kadesh is about midway up on your map, kind of right there in the middle. You can see the cursor on the screen. It's like to the left of Edom. Y'all see it? All right. So from Mount Sinai or Horeb to Kadesh was about 110 miles. And so they could have actually walked that in 11 days, right? So it would have taken them 11 days to get from Mount Sinai to Kadesh, so that south entrance of Canaan, the promised land. And so when they get up there to the south entrance, they decide they're going to send in 12 spies to see if the people are strong or to see if they're weak. Does that sound like a good idea? What did God say? It doesn't matter if the people are strong or weak. All the people were going to be stronger than them. There were going to be more of them than them. But God said that he would already drive these people out for them, right? In Exodus 23, we looked at it. And so they spied out for 40 days. So they sent those 12 spies in there for 40 days. 10 of them came back saying, there is no way we can take them. We look like grasshoppers compared to them. There is absolutely no way. But Joshua and Caleb said, we can do it. We have got this. If God is on our side, then he will bring us into it. We don't have to worry about all those people. And so they weren't having it. The Israelites would, the rest of them would not have it. They're like, no, we're not going in there to get killed. And so God had already promised them and told them. And so this is what he says are the consequences for not believing what God said. Numbers 14. It says, the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, how long shall I bear with this evil congregation who are grumbling against me? I have heard the complaints of the sons of Israel, which they're making against me. Say to them, as I live, says the Lord, just as you have spoken in my hearing, so I will surely do to you. Your corpses will fall in the wilderness, even all your numbered men, according to the complete number from 20 years old and upward, who have grumbled against me. So all those warriors that they counted, they were going to die in the wilderness. He's telling them, your corpses will fall in the wilderness. Surely you shall not come into the land which I swore to settle you, except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, the son of Nun. Your children, however, whom you said would become a prey, I will bring them in, and they will know the land that you've rejected. So all the kids, the ones that were under 20, they were going to get to go in. But as for you, your corpses will fall in the wilderness. Your sons shall be shepherds for 40 years in the wilderness. They will suffer for your unfaithfulness until your corpses lie in the wilderness. According to the number of days you spied out the land, 40 days, for every day you shall bear a guilt bear your guilt a year, even 40 years, and you will know my opposition. So God's saying, every day you didn't believe me is 1 year you're going to spend wandering in the wilderness because you didn't believe me. Right? Because he had promised them, he told them, he had proven himself over and over. Like he had a 10 for 10 track record. Like everything that he promised since the day he brought them out, he made good on, and they didn't believe it on this. They looked at what they saw with their eyes instead of what God had said to them. And so that whole generation, they died in the wilderness because God was not going to make this new nation that he was starting over. Remember, with these people, he was not going to use a fickle, unbelieving generation.
Right.
He was going to bring in people that would believe his word. And that's who he was going to use to set up the promised land. But even Moses, he disobeys God in Numbers 20, and he doesn't get to go into the promised land. And that bothered me a little bit because I'm like, man, Moses was faithful. He put up with their whining and complaining. Like, seriously, God, like, why don't he get to go in? And I was like, wait a minute. He's going to be living in that place and still be leading a bunch of whining, complaining people. Like, well, maybe it's not such a bad thing that he doesn't get to go in, because Moses ends up dying, and for him, he's just passing from life to life, right? So he's moving in with Jesus, and they're moving into the promised land. So the promised land that he got was so much better, and then I was okay with it again. All right. In Numbers 33, 50 through 56, God gives the law of possessing the land, and he gives the boundaries for each of the tribes. So each one of the 12 tribes of Israel, except for the Levites didn't get land because they were the priests. So they didn't get land. And then Joseph didn't take land, but his two sons got land instead. So Ephraim and Manasseh were Joseph's two sons.
Right.
So that made up for the 12 different separations of land. And that is the book of Numbers. All right, so Deuteronomy, by the time they reach the promised land, the first generation of unbelievers has died out without getting to enter. Moses disobeys, he doesn't get to enter. But Deuteronomy is like a series of speeches that Moses gives to the children of Israel before they actually go into the land, right? So they're still not there yet. They're wandering around. They're still so it should have been an 11-day journey. Like when they took that 11-day journey, they could have actually walked straight in right then.
Yep.
Like they could have walked straight in and started living in the land. It could have been 11 days and done. But because they didn't believe God, they turned around and circled the mountain for 40 years. So 40 years. And so Moses, he knows he's not going to get to go into the promised land. And so he starts a series of speeches. And these speeches are to remind them about God's law. Like, don't give up on God. Like, believe in what he says. Do what he says. He'll bless you if you'll just do what he says. Right. And that's these speeches comprise the book of Deuteronomy. And I wanted to look at Deuteronomy 1. So Deuteronomy 1 says, these are the words which Moses spoke to all Israel across the Jordan and in the wilderness, in the Arabah opposite Suph, and between Paran and Tophel and Laban and Hazeroth and Dizabab. It is 11 days' journey from Horeb by the way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. So if they walked an even pace, they could have done about 10 miles a day, which is doable. You walk that much at work, don't you, Mike? So 10 miles a day, they could have been there in 11 days. So in the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, so 40 years after all the people who didn't believe were already gone, finally God says, okay, turn your eyes northward. It's time to go in, right? And so Moses spoke to the children of Israel according to all that the Lord had commanded to give them, after he had defeated Sihon and the king of the Amorites, who lived in Heshbon, remember that one, and Og, the king of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth and Edrei. So those are going to be important in just a little bit. So again, here's the map with Sinai down at the bottom and Kadesh Barnea. So that was that 11-day journey, but then 11 days turned into 40 years. Wow. Yeah. All right. Then in Deuteronomy 7, this is another one that anytime I teach this, I always make sure that I read Deuteronomy 7 again, because again, this is just God's instructions for inheriting the promised land. It says, when the Lord your God brings you into the land where you're entering to possess it and clears away the nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and stronger than you. And when the Lord your God delivers them before you and you defeat them, right? These are words of confidence and prophecy. When God delivers you and you defeat them, then you shall utterly destroy them. Get this, you shall make no covenant with them and show no favor to them. Furthermore, you shall not intermarry with them, and you shall not give your daughters to their sons, nor shall you take their daughters for your sons. So he's telling them specifically, don't make friends with these people. They are not your friends. So these people are worshiping idols and Baals and all of these people. So he's, don't marry with these people, right? We're moving these people out. So it says, for they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods, and then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he will quickly destroy you. But thus you shall do to them. You shall tear down their altars and smash their sacred pillars, hew down their Asherim, and burn their graven images with fire. For you are a holy people to the Lord your God, and the Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his own possession out of all of the peoples on the face of the earth. So God, he's telling them, he's like, don't give up on God. Like, do what God says do. You'll be blessed if you do what God says do. He's just reminding them just once again. And so at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, Moses dies and he doesn't get to go in. And so that brings us to Joshua. Now, Joshua is from the tribe of Ephraim, which was one of Joseph's sons. Remember Jacob, Joseph, and then Joseph had Ephraim and Manasseh. Those were his 2 sons. And so Joshua has been Moses' kind of right-hand man this whole time. He's kind of been second in command. He was one of the original 12 spies. He went into the promised land, and he was one of the 2 that brought back the good report. And so he's chosen to be Moses' successor and leads the Israelites into the promised land, but they have their battles, right? But God tells him in chapter 1, just be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. Follow my voice. Let me lead you. Be strong and courageous, Joshua. And so, again, the first time that they approached the promised land, they could have walked right in, but now they're approaching during flood season, and they're going to have to cross the Jordan River. So it's going to be another Red Sea type crossing for them, and God's going to part the water for them again. So he does that again, and God reminds them, I'm going to give you victory. And so this time, Joshua, they're camped out in Jericho, which will be on the other side of the Jordan River. So if you find the Jordan River, it's on the other side of the Jordan River. So it's kind of right up at the top. Can you see where my cursor's at right there? There's like kind of just diagonal down from Canaan. So they're on the other side of the Jordan River. And so they're going into Jericho. So Joshua, he's going to send in some spies also. But he's not going in to see if they can take the land. They're going in to make a plan on how they're going to take the land. That's the difference. They're sending in spies, but they're just going in to get a lay of the land, figure out exactly how they're going to do it. And so these 2 spies, they go into a prostitute's house named Rahab. And so Rahab, I want to look at that. Rahab's heard of God. She knows these people and who they are. So in Joshua 2, this is Rahab, and she said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us. Remember earlier when I told you to remember how God was going to send the terror before him? When he took them out of Egypt, it came out with great noise. Like, people heard about it. Like, it wasn't just like, oh, that happened way over in Egypt and nobody in the rest of the world knew what was going on. The people in Jericho knew about it. Right. I mean, if you, like, Egypt was down here, Jericho's up here. They didn't have Facebook. They didn't have newspapers, telephones, none of that. But news made Jericho. And Rahab says, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and terror has fallen on us. We're scared to death, is what she's saying. All the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you and came out of Egypt. And then here's these 2 kings that we talked about just a second ago in Numbers. And what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who are beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. Again, news was made. Like they heard what was going on there. And she said, and when we heard it, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For the Lord your God, he is in heaven and above and on earth beneath. And so they knew, they heard. Rahab was the only one that believed. There's a lot of people that will hear about God. They'll hear a lot of things about God, but it takes believing in God. It takes accepting like what the story, what you've heard is true, right? You can hear the story, but you've got to receive it and believe it yourself. And so she knows God, she knows his power. And so she hides them up on her roof. She's like, we'll make a deal here. I'll hide you if you'll protect me when you come in to take this city. And so the king finds out that the spies are in town, and I guess the prostitute's house, maybe that was a good gossip place, like that's where a lot of gossip got back to the king. And the king finds out pretty quick that they just got into town and he's already found out that they're there, right? And so she's like, no, man, they were here, but they left. They went out the gate. They're already gone. And so she goes back up and she tells the two spies that in exchange for their protection, that they need to save her and her family. And they're like, okay, we promise we'll save you and your family if they're in your house. You need to tie a red cord in the window. And when we see that red cord, when we see the blood, right, that red cord representing the blood, when we see the red cord, we'll spare your house. But they've got to be in your house. Again, they've got to believe. Like it's not just enough to hear about God. You've got to believe in him. And so she's like, gather up your family, get them in your house, we're coming back, right? And so I'm guessing that as soon as they got out the door, she was looking for some red cord, and that she was going ahead and putting it in the window so that she could be ready. And she probably, hopefully, like what we're supposed to be doing, going around telling our family and our friends, if you'll just come to my house, like God's going to spare us. Like if you'll just come, God is going to spare us. He's going to take care of us.
Did you tell her?
She's a prostitute?
Did you
yeah. Yeah.
Understood.
Oh, I think I did. Did I say? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So the two spies come back and they tell Joshua, we got this. We're ready to go. So God parts the Jordan River just like he did at the Red Sea, and the Israelites cross on dry ground. And so they get over to Jericho, and Jericho's fortified with walls around it, right? And so God gives them kind of some weird instructions. He just tells them to march around it. For 7 days, I want you to march around it. 6 days, don't say nothing. Just march around it. On the 7th day, march around it 7 times. Right. And then at the 7th time, blow your trumpets. Yep. Blow your trumpets. And can you imagine the amount of reverberation over 1 million people marching through that land? God knows exactly how many steps it would take to drop that wall. Yeah. Because every time I had the kids do this at my house, and I tried to do it the other night, it doesn't work so good in here because part of this is on concrete. But like literally, like stuff started like floating off my shelves as they were marching. I'm like, okay, stop, before we break stuff. But the reverberation of that many people marching around that wall, God knew exactly how many steps it would take. He knew that it would take that 7th time, and then it was done. The wall falls, all except for one part of that wall, Rahab's house, right? And so he spares her and brings her and her whole family out. And so when the Israelites were there, they weren't supposed to take anything from Jericho, but there's a couple of guys that do. They go in and they see some stuff. They're like, oh, I know we weren't supposed to take. We could put some of this in the offering. Like we'll just take this stuff out. Well, they go into another battle in Ai, and they end up losing that battle. And Joshua cries out to God, like, God, what happened? Like I thought you were with us. Why have you not come through for us this time? And God tells Joshua what happened about the 2 guys that had taken some stuff that they weren't supposed to take. So every time that they would do what God said do, they would win. And when they disobeyed, they lost. It was just as easy as that, right? And so in Joshua chapters number 13 through 21, the land is divided among the sons of Israel. This is when they all kind of get their plots. And they're supposed to go in and just wipe out the inhabitants of the land. But they go in and they start worshiping false gods. They start intermarrying with the people, and their hearts get turned away from God. And so Joshua, he's getting ready to die. And he leaves the Israelites with a parting message. He says, remember everything that God has done for you and brought you through, how he's delivered you and he's given you countless victories. Now choose you this day who you'll serve. He's telling them, make a choice, guys. The choice is easy. Choose God. And so Joshua, he ends up passing away. And that brings us into the book of Judges. All right, so Judges. The Israelites, they're finally living in their promised land, right? They're living in this land in houses they didn't have to build. They're eating food that they didn't have to grow. They're drinking wine that they didn't have to press. I mean, they are living in everything that God has promised them. All of the benefits of being a child of God, right? Because they were God's people, he had set up these blessings for them that they could inherit there. Well, in Judges 2:6-10, Joshua dies. Yeah, okay. So Joshua dies, and all of the elders who saw what Joshua did, what God did for the people. And verse number 10 in Judges 2. Yeah, here it is. Sorry. All right. When Joshua dismissed the people, the sons of Israel went to his inheritance to possess the land. So he broke it up the land the way it was supposed to. All the different tribes were going to their areas, right? Like they had their camps in their areas. The people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who survived Joshua, who had seen all the great work of the Lord which he had done for Israel. Then Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, dies at the age of 110. And they buried him in the territory of his inheritance in Timnath-Heres in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. So Joshua was from the tribe of Ephraim. And it says, all the generation also were gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord, nor yet the work he had done for Israel. I believe when I did the math, and I'll have to double check myself on this, but I believe it was about 30 years that it took them to forget. Can you imagine, like, everything that God has done for them? I mean, you're standing there watching God part waters. I mean, is that not a story that you would pass down to your kids? Be like, you should have been there. This was the most amazing thing. And like the kids hopefully would tell their kids, like, my grandfather was there when God parted the water, like he was there when God made water come out of a rock. Those are stories that surely we would pass on to our kids. But there arose a generation that did not know God. And so they began to do all kinds of horrible things. It says, continuing on, then the sons of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served Baals. And they forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods from among the gods of the people who were around them, and bowed themselves down to them, and thus they provoked the Lord to anger. So they forsook the Lord and served Baal and the Asherah. So all of these gods who had done nothing for them at all, zero for them, had done nothing for them, they're willing to bow down to these things, right? Like, and they just forgot all about God. They're living the life of luxury in the land that God has promised them, and they forget all about Him. Like the parents need to be in check here because they didn't pass these things down to their kids, right? And so God ends up raising up these judges to keep the people kind of in line. And they act right for a little while, and then they fall back into their old rebellious ways. And some familiar judges that you might know are Deborah. She was actually a judge and a prophetess. She helps Barak deliver the Israel from the Canaanites. And then there's Gideon, there's Samson, and those are probably the most familiar to you. If you were here on Sunday, you would know Ehud and Shamgar. Right, babe? Amen. All right, Judges 21. This is how the book of Judges ends. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. That's where they leave it. They were again defining for themselves good and evil. It's kind of where we're at in the world today, where people are just deciding that, they're identifying as all kinds of different stuff. Be what you want to be, follow your heart, you be you, all that garbage. It's garbage. It's just the same thing that was happening in the period of the judges. In the period of the judges, they should have been living their best life ever, but they entered into one of the darkest times of their history. I mean, the times when they forsook the God who delivered them. I mean, it breaks my heart. I can't even imagine how it breaks God's heart. So the period of Judges ends with Samuel, who becomes a prophet and also an anointer of kings. And then just two more sentences here. Ruth is the next story. Ruth is the story of a Moabite girl. Does anybody remember who the Moabites were? Remember Lot and his daughters? They came out of Sodom and Gomorrah, and then they decided they needed to carry on the family line. Well, one of the daughters ends up having Moab by her father, and then the other daughter ends up having, my mind just went blank. Somebody help me? The Ammonites, Benami is who she had. All right, but the Moabites. So Ruth was a Moabite. The Moabites and the Israelites did not get along. They hated each other. Okay, and so this Moabite girl, Ruth, she marries Boaz, who is Rahab, the prostitute's son, right? And she actually becomes part of the lineage of King David and Jesus. I mean, look at the black sheep in that family, right? We've got, the prostitute, we've got a Moabite, we've got all of these different things that are coming together. And again, it's not about where we've been, but it's where God wants to take us. Right. And so Boaz becomes her kinsman redeemer, and that's a picture of Christ becoming our kinsman redeemer and redeeming us from what we deserve. No, it was a lot, but we made it through Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, and Ruth tonight. I know it felt like